Aaron Isaacs is a 40-plus year volunteer with the Minnesota Streetcar Museum, where he has served as the historian, board chair, and a motorman for many years. He has presented some very popular programs to us over the years. In the recent years, the Linden Hills 101, Minneapolis reuses the railroad, trench warfare in Midtown Minneapolis. He presented on Southwest streetcars, including Como Harriet, Bryant, Nicollet Avenue, and Lake Street. He's also a noted local history author. His works include Twin Cities by Trolley, the streetcar era in Minneapolis and St. Paul, Twin Ports by Trolley, the streetcar area in Duluth and Superior, Como Harriet streetcar line, the 1940s, the Interurban Special number 14. Those are all books and booklets that he's done. And he's been the longtime editor of the Minnesota Streetcar Museum's magazine, Twin City Lines, formerly the Mini Gazetteer. Earlier this year, Aaron and Peter Sussman gave a wonderful program called Linden Hills 101. You can watch it on our website. It will give you a great orientation to the neighborhood's history and an opportunity to study the great maps and photos that they included. At this, let me turn it over to Aaron.
So, some of you are probably wondering why are there two topics on this show. And it was going to be the Living New Deal. That's what we did in the planning session. And I went and put the thing together, and I realized I didn't have an entire show. I had about a half hour's worth, maybe, at the most. And I called up Joe Ellen and said, Joe Ellen, I don't have an entire show, but I have another half of a show. And they're both on infrastructure. So why don't we put them together, and everyone will think this was part of the master plan. So anyway, the Living New Deal, I had been curious for some time about all the New Deal construction that had been built, kind of how much of it was there and how much of it is still around. And I stumbled on this website, the Living New Deal, that has, for every state in the union, the list of all the things that got built, and a fair number of pictures of them. And then I used some of those, and I went out and got some more. During the Trump administration, the first administration, every week was infrastructure week and nothing got built. Well, it was different in the 1930s. I think we don't have an appreciation. You know, we went through COVID, we went through the Great Recession, 2008 or so, but I don't think we have any idea how deep the Great Depression was. I mean, the economy was cut by 30, 40, maybe even 50% in places. And there was no safety net, and it was truly a dire situation. And along came the Roosevelt administration. They created the New Deal, a whole bunch of public agencies that spent a great deal of money in order to put people back to work. And we're the beneficiaries of that. And so there were a series of them. And I'm just going to flip through these. Once again, this is info from that website I just typed up. So you had the Civilian Conservation Corps, and this was, people getting out and planting trees and building cabins in parks and state parks. 1 billion fish stocked in waterways. I wonder who counted that up. The Public Works Administration, and this is a lot of what you're going to see. Dams, sewage plants, airports, college buildings, post offices, a lot of post offices. And within the post offices, you'll see, of course, they had programs where they hired artists. And a lot of these public buildings, there wound up being murals and artwork inside that was also part of this. And the WPA, which I think is what everyone thinks of. When you think of these, you think of the WPA, even though you have a lot of these other agencies. But look at that, a half a million miles of roads, 77,000 bridges, firehouses, water lines, sidewalks. Yeah, I have no idea. I suppose in Minneapolis there's probably a lot of sidewalks that were built by the WPA. The Rural Electrification Administration, something we don't think about, but bringing power to rural America. And I've never heard of this, the National Youth Administration. And how they managed to have an exact count of over a million pieces of school furniture is an interesting question, but they do. Swimming pools, trees, tennis courts, golf courses. And the Civil Works Administration. Lots of roads, lots of parks, levees, athletic fields, etc. So, I found this plaque on the entrance pylons to Como Park. Como Park, it turns out, Como Park Zoo has got a fair amount of stuff. And so now this is just going to be a series of slides showing where they are. I don't really have any particular interpreting message on them, but just to show you these things are still out there doing what they were intended to do, a pretty good public investment. A great deal of them were made out of stone, which I think is helpful. So anyway, there's the pylons themselves. This is on the Hamlin Avenue entrance, the west entrance to Como Park. And and if you've ever gone, they have this big rotunda, kind of pie-shaped wild animals, horses and buffalo and stuff like that. This little thing, it's got a little fake water wheel that runs continuously. I don't know really what else it's for. It's just kind of decorative, but it was built by the WPA. Same thing with this. There's a big fireplace. Now, it doesn't look like you can actually build a fire in it anymore because there's a grill over that arched entrance there, but nonetheless it's there. And those of us who are maybe a little bit older remember going to the zoo before it kind of got bigger and fancier. The animal display building, which is kind of a deco-looking thing. I mean, I always felt bad for the animals in these little concrete cells, but nonetheless, hey, this was, the start of Como Park Zoo. And so you go around Baker Playground in St. Paul, Hamlin Park Playground, also showing some definite Art Deco influences. The Harriet Island Pavilion. Holman Field. You can go have lunch in there. They have a restaurant. Yeah. Mounds Park, all the walls, there are lots of walls and things, walls and steps. This is one of my favorites right here. Have you been to Hidden Falls? Hidden Falls is down just below the Ford plant, where the Ford plant was. And the creek that feeds it was underground through the Ford plant site, and now that whole site has been cleared, it has been daylighted. So now that creek, at least the portion of it within that site, is here. But there's these colossal stone retaining walls and sets of steps to get you down into this thing. And just a classic example of WPA. And then you go to the State Fair. And a lot of the State Fair was the 4-H building. And, once again, kind of classic, center vertical if you're an architecture kind of a person. The horse barn. The swine barn. The sheep and poultry barn. And there's some big things. Minneapolis Armory, still around. By the way, one of my little side things that I do, side hustle, is I'm a tour guide down at Target Field. And the Minneapolis Lakers, when they were still here, they played games in the Armory. And after they left and decamped to Los Angeles, where they're still called the Lakers even though there are no lakes, somebody saved part of the floor, the basketball floor, and they put it in the Town Ball Tavern bar in Target Field. So if you happen to be in Target Field, go into the Town Ball Tavern, and in kind of the raised area behind the bar is the old basketball floor from the Minneapolis Lakers. The Minneapolis Main Post Office, which is really kind of an Art Deco gem, but the city is not particularly happy with it because it blocks access to the riverfront. And so they're not quite sure what to do about that. There are various plans to kind of make the post office move or something. Be interesting to see. But nonetheless, it's a really cool interior if you go in there. Now, if you've been to Minnehaha Park, once again, walls and stairs and just all over the place, and bridges over the creek. Now, I think they've been doing some repairs on them because, this stuff is 90 years old now, and so it has to be maintained. But once again, it's an indicator of really what a good idea that was back then. Now, here's one that surprised me. I didn't know that this was a New Deal project, the Longfellow House replica. It was a library for quite a while. And now it's kind of open. I think you can kind of charter it, put events in there and things like that. I've always been kind of puzzled by this. The Riverside Park Bathhouse, which is kind of across the river from the U of M and kind of down below Fairview Hospital. And I'm not quite sure why there's a bathhouse there. It's not like there's a beach or anything. The St. Anthony Falls Hydro Lab. Pioneer Hall, the dormitory on University Avenue. And here's a surprise of local interest, Southwest High School. Fort Snelling National Cemetery. And there's a lot more to it. I mean, that's at the entrance. But, there's a lot more architecture that was involved with this. I just took that as a shot. So you start to move out into the suburbs. And this is in Columbia Heights. And of course, there are post offices. And Wayzata, Hastings. And as I mentioned, you go into these and you start to get artwork. North St. Paul. And a lot of the post offices are kind of neo-colonial, which is sort of nice. Albert Lee. Here's a mural inside the Cambridge post office. This next one came off their site, Hibbing Memorial Building. A dam at Blue Mound State Park. Carlos Avery Game Farm. An overlook by Lake Superior. And once again, I'm not getting them all. This is really kind of a sampler here. City Hall up in Carlton, that's kind of deco. School in Chisago City. Auditorium up in Deerwood, up on the Cuyuna Range. Field House in Duluth. Duluth has a bunch of stuff, lots of stuff made out of stone up in Duluth. They got that there. Lincoln Park Pavilion. Wade Stadium, still hosting minor league baseball. When you go up to the Duluth Zoo, I took these couple of shots. There's a creek that runs through the zoo, and there's a series of bridges over it that were all built by them. There's a series of animal enclosures with artificial rocks. Fort Ridgely State Park. Gooseberry Falls State Park. Interstate Park in Taylor's Falls. Wilmer City Auditorium. Anyway, that's the extent of that presentation. So you can kind of see why I needed some more stuff. But this would be an appropriate time. If anyone has comments about, yes?
You go out on Highway 7, about a mile east of Excelsior. The highway goes down as it approaches the town. And back in 34, 35, that's when the state punched through Highway 7. And they had to they had to buy about 7 acres of land around there to get fill for the highway. And when the highway was done, they had this land around there. And well, let's just build a park there. So you will notice, you see it better if you're coming east out of Excelsior, but on the south side, there is a stone monument to Charlie Christmas, the early county surveyor, and there's also a couple of stone fire circles up there. But on the north side of on the hill, there is a semicircle overlook, and if, again, made out of stone, and if you look at the bottom, there's a little plaque that says National Youth Administration.
So that's what Christmas Lake is named for, is a guy?
Christmas. Yep.
I've always wondered about that. Anybody else, any of other sites that you know about, Ruth?
How about Lilac Way, Highway 100?
Yes, that's correct. Lilac Way, even though it was 1939 or 40, the beehive ovens are part of that, yes.
So how did the administration decide which particular places they were going to, build these structures? I mean, did different cities kind of bid for it, or how was it decided? What particular places were built?
I don't know. I am guessing that simply politics, log rolling, meant that everyone got a taste. And so I'm sure that all the local constituency, the local congressmen and all, said, well, I like something here, 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 and here. But I don't personally know.
Wasn't the wall along the shore of Lake Harriet built during the WPA, the one that's crumbling on the west side?
That I don't, that's a good question. I don't know. Does the Peter Sussman know, or?
So both the retaining wall along the shore of Lake Harriet and the wall along the east shore of then Lake Calhoun, now Bademakaska, were WPA.
Well, they were. Okay, thank you. They did not show up in this database.
So did you happen to come across any sort of the vetting? How did all these artists and architects and stonemasons and everybody get selected?
Okay, once again, I didn't. I went and basically said, hey, I want to run slides off this website. So I didn't really go deeper than that. And my apologies for being a bad historian.
They also hired a lot of writers to write histories of states and just other things that had gone on to keep them out of the alleyways, I guess.
Right. I mean, I did not list the guidebooks. There are guidebooks written by every single state, for every single state.
Continuing on the library theme, the special collections at the library, of course, has lots of great digitized maps and atlases, and one that I find particularly high quality and particularly valuable is itself a WPA project. They did the cartography and updating and everything to put that 1940 atlas together.
Yeah, another thing, in today's Variety, there's an article about civic architecture by James Lilix. I think that this program shows us that we can get much more rich history than sometimes you get in the paper, because he doesn't even mention Art Deco or modern architecture at all in civic buildings, talking about civic buildings and the WPA not mentioned in that article. So we're getting a richer history here.
I wanted to mention also the artists. There were a number of them that were hired to make prints that were, I believe, were sold so people could afford to have art in their homes for low prices. They have a large collection of them at the Hennepin History Museum, if anybody wants to see them.
Yeah, there's a series of famous prints of national parks, and they put out, kind of on the anniversary of it, I have a copy of it, they put out a book where for those national parks that didn't have one of these Art Deco style prints, they made new ones and then they printed the old ones. Any more here? All right, well then we'll move into the second half. Twin Cities canceled Freeways. And I have a little personal involvement in that because my father, George Isaacs, who passed away some years ago, was involved in a couple of these. But, you know, much has been made, and for good reason, of how I-35W went right through the African-American neighborhood in South Minneapolis, and I-94, of course, through the Rondo neighborhood in St. Paul, and displaced a lot of people. If you think that was bad, you have no idea what it could have been. And so I'm going to show you freeways that were going to happen. Now, there's different iterations of them, and this is kind of the earliest vision for it. The first ones kind of keyed off the highways, the U.S. highways and state highways as they were then. And so going up, that's Highway 52, which is now County Road 81, going up northwest, up Broadway or so. And now that wasn't supposed to be really a freeway. It was going to be kind of a 4-lane divided at grade with grade crossings. But where it came into downtown, down between 3rd and 4th Street, it became grade separated, and there was going to be like a big master garage on top of it, kind of across from City Hall. And then it was going to, once again, on the surface, go down about 11th and 12th Street, just on the east side of Loring Park, and then around the south side where 94 is today, and that was pretty much going to be on the surface. So this is kind of 1940s stuff and early 1950s stuff that mostly didn't happen. And you can see there was going to be something that turned out to be a little bit similar to I-94, but it was going to go down Minnehaha Avenue and then across the river next to the Short Line Railroad Bridge, which is the bridge that Benny would like to have the Midtown Greenway on. And then there was going to be another one of these going across 28th Street. And then one down between Lake of the Isles and Cedar Lake. And for the most part, this all just didn't get built. It was really kind of early, but it was them trying to think, how do we move traffic through the Twin Cities? But it wasn't quite as destructive as what would be proposed later. So here's a closer look at the one through North Minneapolis. And once again, on the surface, and remember that traffic circle? Anybody remember the traffic circle where Victory Memorial Drive met Lowry Avenue, met Oakdale Avenue, right on the city limits of Robbinsdale? And what they did do up there is they put in the grade separation where Highway 52, now County Road 81, simply goes over what is now a conventional intersection.
What's that pink in Broadway there?
Well, basically, what they were doing is they were going to take out most of a block. That would be the block between Fremont and Girard, south of Broadway. And that is a case of where, rather than just having a wider within the street, they would actually take land. And that, thank you, good catch there. And you can see that they were going to, probably in that curved area of Broadway, they would have taken out probably a good half block there. So yes, that was, here's another view of that. And where you can see by Broadway and Girard, they also have a version that would cut all the way across and take the corner off North Commons Park. So definitely they would have probably more right-of-way. The street itself would have required taking right-of-way along the edge of it to get that 4-lane divided width. So once again, an early plan never happened. Here you can see the downtown part of it, and if you can look, there's a whole bunch of stuff happening up just north of downtown, and there you see the one going between 3rd and 4th Street, grade separated and essentially taking that entire block between 3rd and 4th Street. And that was probably also during the period when they were proposing to level lots of the gateway for urban development. That would, I think they viewed that as pretty low value real estate because it was the gateway that eventually just got cleared. And they were also going to, you can see there's an interchange over at Oak and Washington. They were going to do some grade separating through the campus. Matter of fact, one of the things you can see there in the campus, Washington Avenue, you can see there's a land bridge at Church Street, or a land bridge at the south end of the Kaufman Mall. the Northrop Mall leading to Kaufman. And so they were going to grade separate that. If you know how that, there's a hill coming up, and they were just going to dive into the hill and kind of run a trench for Washington Avenue down through the campus. All right. Now we're going to move up. Oh, okay, now this is another version of the U of M, where instead of taking the right-of-way of Washington Avenue, and Washington Avenue is the bridge that you see, the upper bridge, that's Washington. So instead, they were going to build a new bridge and run just south of Kaufman Union, kind of along the bluff face. And I forget what street, a Delaware Street or one of those. They were going to go and plow through a bunch of that to get over and basically have a bypass around the campus. Okay, now we move up into the 50s or so and the modern freeway era. And these are drawings from the MnDOT files, or the Minnesota Highway Department files as it was then. And you can see on this why I-35W jogged north of Lake Street, because it would have gone through the Minneapolis Institute of Arts and through the Fair Oaks Park. And so it had to jog over. Now this one, it's titled Effect on School Districts, but it shows the right-of-way for 35 that happened, but it shows two alternatives, one of which was Cedar Avenue all the way south, and by the way, that turned out to be one that they were going to build, and the other is between Aldrich and Bryant as an alternative. Because if you remember, Lindale was, I think, Highway 65. Lindale was the predecessor, really, to I-35 through South Minneapolis. And you still, to this day, you have the portion of 35 just north of the crosstown where it dumps into Lindale. That was anticipated to do more. But they would have gone and taken out that whole swath. And so one of the things that kind of strikes you as you look at these concept plans was sort of how arrogant the planning was. Well, we'll just draw a line on the map and we'll take every single house out for a city-wide, a city block-wide swath. And that was the thinking behind this. Well, if it's not here, it could just be there. Now, the other thing that you notice in these early freeway plans is that they had a lot more interchanges. And so this is 35, pretty much on the alignment, although you see down at the crosstown, you see there's a shortcut planned. In fact, the dotted line is what they did, running along the city limits and then up. But if you look at it carefully, what you see, and I got to look at my map, I got to look at my map here, is you see interchanges at 50th Street. Well, there isn't one of those. At 42nd Street, there isn't one of those. At 38th Street and 34th, well, they split the difference and made it 35th, 36th. And up at 26th Street and at Franklin. None of those interchanges were built. Now, one of the things, there were freeways built with half-mile interchanges. 494 across Richfield and Bloomington, the Strip. There's an interchange every half mile. Eventually, the federal standards and MnDOT standards changed, so they said, no, 1 mile is more or less the spacing, not half mile. And I think this maybe got caught up in that. Now, this is a map that there's a website that talks about freeways that didn't get built. And this is a map that was made from MnDOT stuff. I couldn't find a MnDOT map of this, but these guys did it, and I think it reflects accurately. This was going to be the Cedar Freeway. You'll notice it's Highway 77. What it was actually going to be was Highway 36. Old Highway 36 came across Roseville, down through North Minneapolis on Johnson Street to 10th Avenue, across the 10th Avenue Bridge, and down Cedar Avenue all the way south. That was Highway 36. And 36 was going to be a freeway all the way through the cities. Well, it is a freeway through North Minneapolis and down to about the West Bank, and then it didn't get built. But as you see, Cedar Avenue itself remains in place, and they have taken the block, I believe that's 18th Avenue is the next street over. They've simply taken that whole block out. And that's what was going to get built. Never did. So here's the Lowry Hill Tunnel, an early version of it, and it really isn't a tunnel. And it's got a bunch of different things. It's got an off-ramp right there for a little street that really doesn't exist east of Lyndale. It's got an off-ramp for Hennepin Avenue and Wayzata Boulevard. It's got an off-ramp southbound into Hennepin. There's just a bunch of detail on this that's different. If you look at this carefully, northbound, if you were northbound on Hennepin, they had this little S-curving ramp that would take you over to Lyndale and so did this one-way separation that way instead of in the bottleneck where it is today. So once again, it just shows how there was a lot of different planning on this. And this is a larger view where you have 94 going up on the alignment that it goes through, but it's got more interchanges than it had. It's got a Plymouth Avenue interchange. Does it have an interchange? Yeah, it has a Plymouth Avenue interchange. And then going across on the south, it's got a Park Avenue exit, an 11th Street, 11th Avenue exit. There's just a lot more interchanges than there ever were before. And this is the portion through North Minneapolis with two different routes through the Camden area. Once again, this has more interchanges. There's interchange at Lowry, which doesn't exist today. And interchange up at 45th Avenue, and you can see an alternate route that would have bypassed the Camden Business District because the freeway went and took out half of that business district. It took out the east half by the river. Now this is an early view of I-94, and the map is kind of fuzzy a little bit, but it doesn't follow quite the alignment. It gets onto the Rondo alignment. You can see there's one jog up and then a second jog up east of Snelling, and that's where it finally gets on the alignment, the Rondo alignment that it finally used. Before that, it's actually on two different alignments, but once again, taking out entire blocks. The effect was the same. It would have decimated the neighborhood as it did, but it was a different alignment. And that was how they got down the bluff. And let me see. Yeah, they wind up, well, it seems to me that's right. It would have gone where the History Center is today, I believe. Pretty sure. That's looking, no. It might have been just below where the History Center is, but it was a different alignment to get down the bluff. Now here we are back going through I-35W through northeast Minneapolis. And you can see, once you got across the river, none of these alignments actually happened. They wound up taking a different route. But the question was, once again, which neighborhood were you going to plow through? Okay, now this is where it starts to get really interesting. I think the one that really is kind of the shocking one is this Crosstown Highway. And that was going to be Highway 280, that just a little north-south thing that connects I-94 with Highway 36 right along the Minneapolis-St. Paul city limits. That was going to then turn and come across South Minneapolis on 28th Street, 27th and then 28th Street, passing between Lake Calhoun and Lake of the Isles. And that is not just a an amped up street. That's a freeway. And over on the extreme right of the map, for many years until they kind of reconfigured it, where 280 came down and met 94, there were stubs of off-ramps that were headed for that freeway that were built. There were also, as you go through northeast Minneapolis, and now you can see the final route that it took, there were stubs for off-ramps that were built for I-335. Now, I-335 there is shown only as a dashed line and had a completely different alignment, which you'll see in a minute. But the off-ramps, there's a lot of room in that interchange up there because they provided for the off-ramps. But there's a couple of other things here. You see the southwest diagonal freeway that would have gone right where the light rail is going today between Isles and Cedar. And that was one that finally, there were two freeways where citizen opposition finally coalesced and stopped them. And one was the Southwest Freeway. And by the way, that was all based on the assumption that Highway 7 would then become a freeway, that this would all connect with Highway 7. And 394 is really not being thought about. 394 is just Highway 12, Wayzata Boulevard. But you can see this 280 coming across 28th Street and the Southwest Diagonal are all designed to feed into Highway 7. And there's also, you'll see way down in the corner there, there's a lot of complexity. And that is a bypass to get down to Excelsior Boulevard, but not through the Minnetonka Golf Course. If you look at it, it nips the far, far northwest corner of the Minnetonka Golf Course, but then it's kind of running on its own land, and that's an area now that is just full of high-rise apartment buildings. Now another is to take a look, and you can see the second freeway that got stopped was the Hiawatha Freeway, Highway 55, and you can see it kind of coming in through the whole Spaghetti Junction thing, and then taking down Cedar and taking a swing around. Now, what it's taking a swing around are the big Milwaukee Road railroad yards and shop area that were right at Lake and Hiawatha. Railroads have the power of eminent domain. They're like the only private businesses almost that do. And so if a railroad does not want to give a government the land, they don't have to. That's negotiated. And so they said, well, we're not going to tangle with the railroad. We'll just go around it. And that is why it goes down to, well, let's see, 33rd Street, and then over to Hiawatha, and then down. Now, later on, the railroad yards went away, and the land became available, and the Hiawatha Freeway was, in fact, going to go straight down Hiawatha.
Excuse me, did they have the technology to go underground? Because a lot of these problems could be solved by going underground.
Oh, the technology has always been there to go underground. It's the expense, because now you're talking about a factor of 5 to 10 times more expensive. So this is a detail of the lakes area off that same map. And here you can see, let's see, you can see the 28th Street Freeway dropping down to 29th. It would have taken West High School out. And of course, running along the north side of Lake Calhoun. And there, of course, you can see the right-of-way of the Southwest Diagonal. Now, here's another way to look at it. There's an aerial photo, and you can see the line. That's the Southwest Diagonal. And you can also see the railroad infrastructure that was there. By the way, it turns out when, if you look north of Lake Street, that bridge at the bottom, that's Lake Street. And you notice there's a railroad yard on the west side of the line there. And a lot of what caused all the problems in Kenwood and Isles Dean with the light rail are because the Minneapolis and St. Louis Railroad, which owned it, sold off that strip that has the freight cars parked on it for townhouses, and wound up just with their main line that has the black line on it and 50 feet of right-of-way there. And that's when they needed to put a double-track light rail and a single-track freight railroad and a bikeway in 50 feet, and they couldn't do it. And if they had condemned, there were two things that would have saved a tremendous amount of money and controversy. One was if they had condemned the townhouses that were on that and simply widened the right-of-way, which is what MnDOT would have done. MnDOT, hey, we're taking the land. But the Metropolitan Council was not willing to do that. Okay, the other alternative was to simply go to a single track for about a quarter mile, third of a mile, from Lake Street up to Cedar Isles. And that, I think, would have squeezed it in. But the light rail planner said, no, we have to have double track. And that made it too wide, and that's what led to the tunnel. And that's what led to the groundwater issues and a whole bunch of other stuff that ballooned the cost of this thing. And it was because of that strip of land right there. So anyway, that's a side thing. I'm an old transit guy, so I've been following this. But, you know, it's kind of like, oh, you could have avoided a lot of that. Anyway, by the way, there you see the grain elevators that are now apartments. Okay, the one that almost got built was the Hiawatha Freeway, and they actually went and cleared the land off south of Lake Street. Big old strip of land. If you remember Hiawatha Avenue, back then, well, this I think is, no, that's right, that's Hiawatha as it was. And Hiawatha was a terrible street. There was basically no turn lanes or anything. So what they did finally is they built a bunch of houses on the land. If you go out there today behind the sound walls, there's a whole bunch of houses that were built on the land. Oh, I guess we don't need that right of way anyway. But they did take enough of it to go and upgrade Hiawatha with turn lanes and then provide a reservation for the light rail that was built. And when were those houses put in? I want to say in the 70s, maybe into the 80s. Yeah, it was about that time. Now 335, and this is the other one that got stopped. And 335 was going to be the loop around the north side of downtown. And as you can see, it crosses right south of the Plymouth Avenue Bridge. It goes through Boom Island. Boom Island was a railroad yard, and it had a shingle factory. I'm forgetting the name of the company. They had a shingle factory there. And so they took that, and then they went and they cleared a strip of land. They did take out all the housing along 3rd Avenue Northeast, between like 2nd and 3rd Avenue Northeast, and cleaned that out, and then it went over to meet I-35. And so that was another where all the land got cleared and then the freeway got stopped because of citizen opposition. And now if you go on that section along 3rd Avenue Northeast, there's townhouses that have been built on that land. And if you go into Boom Island, it's now Boom Island Park. Here's a more detailed view of it. Okay, now there were a couple of others that I've looked at the MnDOT records and the MHS, and I know I have one map here that shows a couple of these freeways that were proposed, but I can't find any detailed drawings of them, which means the idea must not have progressed very far, but nonetheless it was supposed to happen. Okay, you have 35, now there's a lot of lines to sort out here, but you've got I-35 and you have the exits that today go into Johnson Street and dump into Johnson Street. Well, there was going to be another one that took off and didn't go up Johnson. It went up a couple of blocks east of Central. So it would have been one of the President Streets You know, there's all the streets there are named for presidents in an alphabetical order. One of the things I love about Minneapolis. Pardon me? Oh, that's right. That's right. They're okay. I stand corrected. Yes, they are in order of their terms. Yeah. But anyway, so it appears to be that you can see a dashed line for Highway 65 because Highway 65, Central Avenue, is still a MnDOT highway. And they were going to solve that by simply taking out an entire set of blocks through northeast Minneapolis. Now, the other one, Highway 10 going north, actually basically came down Lexington Avenue through Roseville. And if you look on Lexington Avenue and Highway 36, you'll see a dashed line going straight down Lexington to Como Park and running along the north shore of Lake Como and replacing Como Avenue down to about Western Avenue in St. Paul. And for the life of me, I can't find it, but you can see that it was planned. And there would have been a freeway running along the shore of Como Lake. So that's that one. And then the other one is Highway 5, which comes out of Stillwater, it was Stillwater and then down through Lake Elmo. And you go on to Highway 5 today, and bam, at the it's either McKnight Road or Century Avenue. Just before it gets to St. Paul, it simply stops. Is it Century?
Well, no, Century and McKnight are the same road.
No, they're not. They're separated by a mile, parallel. And Maplewood, it's that long tail of Maplewood is between Century and McKnight. I can't remember exactly which one it stops at, but suddenly, bang, the freeway ends. Well, what was the freeway supposed to do? It was supposed to go all the way into St. Paul and hook up with 94 and Highway 61 on the east side, and there are different iterations of it. This one has it going all the way through the east side. We got a little better map here. And here you've got, here it kind of comes plowing through the east side of St. Paul. That's downtown St. Paul, down on the lower left. And so you can see 994 following basically the alignment that that's the alignment that it's on today. And this north-south one, that's Highway 61 coming in. And so they were going to go all the way up and then out east, and this thing right here was going to kind of plow through the neighborhoods parallel to 7th Street. Now, what in fact got built was Pennsylvania Avenue, which is that interchange over on the left of 35E. It comes across, and now it follows the railroad tracks. There was some vacant railroad land that was sold off, and so it now is Phelan Boulevard, and it's kind of grade separated, kind of not, and it follows the railroad tracks parallel to that out as far as about Johnson Parkway or so, and then this thing didn't get built. And that is my last slide. So there you go. Imagine what the city would have looked like if they built all that. How are we doing time-wise?
I believe there was some pushback from the various municipalities regarding losing tax base.
Oh yeah. I mean, it took a tremendous amount of tax base out, and that was a real argument.
Aaron, so early in the the interstate planning process, were there public meetings with citizens, or was that something that kind of came later, begrudgingly, by the transportation planners?
I don't know for sure, but I think the latter. I think that's something that they got forced into doing. I know there's no question that they have to do a lot more of it now than they used to. And before it was just kind of like, we just do this.
I got a response to the announcement of this program questioning if the route of 35 through South Minneapolis, 35W, actually took out black housing. And they claim that the were people that lived along that area, and that it actually skirted the black neighborhood and took out mostly white housing. And perhaps that person is here, can elaborate on that, but it seems to me that the black neighborhoods were more along 3rd and 4th, and perhaps if they had followed that route, they would have had to take out a lot of schools. That's kind of my observation now, including Central and Bryant and Field and a bunch of other schools. So anyhow, does anybody have more on that?
Well, I mean, we had a program on that. I can't comment myself, although I think it certainly took at least the western edge of the South Side black neighborhood, but we had a program on that.
I was going to say that Will Craig of Cura, or formerly of Cura, he actually did a study of it looking at census data, and he drew up a map and wrote an article for it. Showed up in History magazine, and his data indicates that the black neighborhoods were largely missed.
Really?
Yeah, by the fact that it did go some blocks to the west. So yeah, I was aware of Will volunteers for us, and he would report regularly and on his research, and then showed us the map and all that kind of stuff. That's the only reason I know about it.
Just want to say that when thinking about that alignment, you have to think not only in terms of what did it take out, but also what did it divide from what? What did it serve as a barrier between?
Well, I was just going to say, when you talk about citizen objections, I just remember this was just recently, that section of 35E that goes through part of a neighborhood in St. Paul. It took years for that ever to be finished so that it linked with 94 and on up. And to this day, the speed limit changes and trucks can't go on there. And that was all citizen protests.
Yeah, that's a good point, and I should have remembered to include that was the case of the neighborhood couldn't quite stop the freeway, but they got some major concessions. It's got a 45-mile-an-hour speed limit on it. Yeah. You're right, no trucks, there's extra landscaping. The other one is the connection from that 35E via Ide Mill Road to 94. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the plan, the plan was always that there would be a freeway connection up at the north end of that. Well, that's never gotten built, and it's because of citizen opposition. So thank you. That's a good addition.
What is the nature of canceling a freeway? Is there a board that sits and says we're going to not build it?
Well, it hasn't happened in a long time. I think it was basically MnDOT discovering that they were up against so much citizen opposition that then in turn led to municipal opposition, official municipal opposition, and it's kind of like, we'll back off and not do this. And it might have been that combined with the challenge of finding enough money to build it too. Because I can tell you, and I was Metro Transit's liaison to MnDOT for a number of years in the 90s and early 2000s, and MnDOT, the guys there said, look, we're not trying to build new highways anymore. We don't have enough money to maintain what we have. Our priority is maintenance now. And so that's a priority that shifted over time from building new to just trying to keep up what they have because their revenue is insufficient.
I think at some point in the process of establishing the interstate system, the Minnesota legislature got involved too. I'm not exactly sure what kind of sway they had in terms of changing things, but I think with MnDOT receiving funds from the legislature, it got political at the state level too.
Right, and of course, if the original concept for the interstate system was that it would come near cities and bypass them but not go through. And nobody had originally anticipated that building freeways through cities was the thing to do.
Anyway, thank you so much, and thank you, Aaron. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.